You use my components to fix some stranger's car for free? You're fired, asshole, right now. And I'm keeping this whole month's pay. Deducting the battery cable connector. Deducting the workday you walked out on. And deducting the tool cabinet you forgot to lock last night.
Ryan was still crouched on the oil-stained floor, picking up the screws that had fallen from the drawer.
You think this is a charity?
But right then, a smooth, heavy engine sound rolled in from outside the door.
Stand up.
What do you need?
I need you to stand up.
At 9 p.m. on Friday, Lone Star Auto had shut off almost all its lights. And on the neon sign outside flickered the word auto in tired red letters. Inside the shop, the smell of motor oil, hot rubber, and old metal clung to the air. Ryan Cole was half under a silver pickup, one hand holding a flashlight, the other tightening a bolt assembly near the transmission. He had worked 11 hours that day. By now, he should have been home, listening to Lily read her homework, then pretending he wasn't tired when she asked if his back hurt. But that night he was still there, because last week Derek Walsh had deducted another amount from his paycheck under something called toolware. The phrase looked reasonable on a pay stub, but Ryan knew it was just Derek's way of making other people's labor look lighter on paper. A chipped socket, a bottle of cleaner used up too fast, a missing shop towel. Any of it could turn into a deduction, never big enough to sue over, always small enough to hurt. Ryan had learned not to ask too many questions, because every question could turn into a week of worse shifts. He had $47 in his wallet. He knew that number without opening it. It sat in his head like background noise, repeating after every turn of the wrench. Lily's inhaler had run out yesterday afternoon. The one her doctor prescribed cost $89. The pharmacist he knew on the corner had let him pay late twice this year. The third time she had only looked at him with tired sympathy. Ryan had called a cousin in Arlington, an old friend from a tire shop, an aunt on a mother's side. No one had anything extra. It wasn't that they didn't care about him. They were all pressed up against their own bills, too. He kept telling himself Monday was the deadline. In truth, Monday was just the name he had given hope. An asthma attack didn't know about payday. A 7-year-old's lungs didn't wait for adults to gather enough money. But Ryan still had to call it Monday, because if he called it by its real name, he wouldn't be able to keep lying under a truck trying to earn a few more dollars. When the pickup finally started and ran steadily, the clock was almost 10:10. Ryan wrote the job notes in the log, wiped his hands with a rag, locked the parts cabinet, and walked outside. Lone Star Auto sat on an old stretch of road south of Dallas, where low garages and warehouses crowded together under yellow lights. He climbed into his old sedan, the one with the passenger side window that had to be pushed up by hand. On the back seat was Lily's thin blanket. Seeing it reminded Ryan of how his daughter checked his toolbox every night before bed, serious as a tiny supervisor. Lily always asked whether the number 12 wrench was back in the right place, or whether the Phillips screwdriver was in the left slot. She said if everything was ready, tomorrow would be less tiring for him. Ryan pulled onto the road and merged onto I-35 in the thin late-night traffic. Dallas at night only traded one kind of noise for another. Tires on concrete, trucks rumbling in the distance, and a lonely horn somewhere near an exit. He cracked the window to stay awake. Cold air pushed in, carrying road dust and burnt gasoline. His phone lit up on the passenger seat with a message from the neighbor watching Lily. She's asleep. A little wheezy, but okay. Ryan read the word okay twice. He knew okay meant not worse yet. He set the phone down and sped up just enough to pass a slow-moving truck. His eyes were heavy, his shoulders tight, but his mind was still doing math. $47. Gas until Monday, Lily's gifts, the copay if they had to go to the hospital. Everything in his life kept shrinking itself into subtraction. A little before 11, Ryan saw red hazard lights blinking on the shoulder. A white Range Rover was parked crooked, half its body leaning into the emergency lane. A few steps from the vehicle stood a blonde woman in a black cocktail dress and a thin coat, holding her phone up trying to find a signal. Cars kept passing her, wind snapping at her dress and hair. No one stopped. Ryan eased off the gas by instinct. He didn't have time. He didn't have money. He didn't have the right to get tangled in the problems of a rich person standing beside a car worth more than everything he owned. If that vehicle needed a tow, he didn't have a tow truck. If she needed police, he didn't want his name in any report. Lily was waiting for him at home. Then an old memory hit him hard in the chest. 3 years earlier, Lily had an asthma attack on the way home from a free clinic. Ryan's car died near an overpass. his daughter sitting in the back seat, wheezing, her hands gripping the seatbelt. He turned on the hazards and stood waving at traffic for almost 10 minutes. Sedans, pickups, delivery vans, all of them went around him. No one stopped. One driver even honked because Ryan was standing too close to the lane. That night, Ryan carried Lily almost half a mile to a gas station, listening to her broken breathing against his ear. After that night, he stopped seeing people stranded on the road as a nuisance. He saw them as the question Lily had once asked while recovering: "If we were stuck, wouldn't we want somebody to stop, Daddy?" Ryan turned on his signal and pulled onto the shoulder about 30 feet in front of the Range Rover. He sat there for 1 second, breathed out, then stepped out. The woman backed up half a step when she saw him coming. He didn't blame her. 11 at night on I-35 wasn't an easy place to trust a stranger. He kept both hands visible and said briefly that he was a mechanic and would only look at the car if she agreed. She looked at his oil-stained uniform, looked at his old sedan, then nodded very slightly. Her name was Evelyn Hart, but Ryan didn't know that yet. To him in that moment, she was only a blonde woman standing beside a dead car, trying to stay calm in a dress that didn't belong on a highway shoulder. She said the car had shown a warning, then slowly lost power after she pulled over. Her phone had no signal, and roadside assistance wouldn't connect. Ryan listened, nodded, and opened the hood. The problem showed itself quickly. The battery terminal was corroded, with white-green buildup crusted around the post. The cable was still there, and the battery wasn't completely dead, but the connection was bad enough to make the electrical system flicker. Ryan took out gloves, a small wire brush, and half a bottle of cleaning solution from his trunk. He worked under the flashlight clipped to his shoulder, traffic cutting past behind him. Evelyn stood 2 steps away, arms wrapped around her elbows, trying not to ask too much but never taking her eyes off him. 21 minutes. Ryan knew because he looked at the time when he started. It wasn't a big job, but it was enough to numb his hand and make his lower back flare. He removed the old terminal connector, cleaned the battery post, and replaced it with a universal spare battery cable terminal he kept in his toolbox. That little part meant almost nothing to the woman beside a Range Rover, but at Lone Star Auto, Derek counted every part like gold. When the engine started again, Evelyn breathed out almost without sound. The dashboard lights steadied. Ryan closed the hood, wiped his hands, and stepped back from the vehicle. Relief and confusion moved across her eyes. She opened her wallet immediately and pulled out several neatly folded bills. The question, how much, came in the voice of someone used to everything having an invoice, and the more urgent the need, the higher the cost. Ryan shook his head. He wasn't good at explaining. The poorer he was, the more he hated having to explain his dignity. Evelyn thought he was rejecting the amount or bargaining, some roundabout way. She pushed more money toward him. Ryan only placed his hand on the hood he had just closed, keeping a respectful distance, and told her to get home safe. That made Evelyn go completely quiet, not because it was beautiful, because it had no condition attached, no business card, no phone number, no story about his daughter, even though that story was clawing inside his chest, no taking advantage of the expensive dress, the luxury car, or the midnight emergency. Just a short wish before a stranger went back to the road. Before getting into his car, Ryan remembered the stack of printed receipts in his shirt pocket. Derek made the mechanics write everything down so he could compare parts and labor at the end of the week. Ryan had formed the habit of giving customers receipts because clear paperwork helped poor people avoid trouble better than spoken promises ever could. He pulled out a sheet, set it on the hood, and wrote, "Friday, 10:52 p.m., southbound I-35 electrical system check, battery post cleaned, battery cable terminal replaced, and engine restarted successfully." He signed his name at the bottom corner, Ryan Cole. On the total line, he wrote £0 ounce. He placed the paper on the hood, said it was there in case she needed to ask about the work later, and walked back to his car. Evelyn picked up the receipt, her eyes stopping on the 0. When she looked up, Ryan's old sedan had already merged back into traffic. His red taillights grew smaller, then blended into the night traffic. What he had left behind wasn't cheap kindness. It was a clean trace, with a date, a time, a signature, and a round 0 that was almost impossible to believe. To Evelyn, it felt like a question placed in the middle of life, one no one had ever asked in the right way before. Ryan didn't know Evelyn Hart would keep that receipt. He didn't know it would sit on her desk and then come back right before the moment that decided Derek Walsh's fate. He had no idea that the thin paper marked, would be the one thing in a room full of adults that couldn't be faked. On Saturday morning, Ryan came to Lone Star Auto with red eyes from too little sleep. Lily was still okay, the neighbor had texted that much, but the word okay never gave him real peace. He opened the shop, changed into his uniform, and checked the vehicle schedule. Marcus, the assistant mechanic who had worked with him for 3 years, was making coffee by the office. Marcus was more than 20 years older than Ryan, heavy-set, slightly stooped, with eyes that looked like they had seen too much. Ryan told him briefly about the Range Rover from the night before, mostly to explain why the spare cable terminal was missing. Marcus listened, then set his coffee down. He asked only one question. "You use Derek's part?" Ryan wiped his hands on a towel. "Battery cable terminal." $15. Marcus looked at him for a while. In that shop, $15 wasn't enough to buy breakfast, but it was enough to become a payroll deduction if Derek wanted it to. Marcus knew that. Ryan knew it too. They both knew Derek kept a small notebook recording every part, every bottle of oil, and every industrial rag as if the shop lived or died by them. Marcus didn't scold Ryan, and he didn't tell him he had done the right thing. He only turned back to work because sometimes silence was the only way they had left not to betray each other. All Saturday, Ryan worked with the feeling of an invisible bill waiting for him. He replaced brake pads on a Camry, checked an oil leak on a Tahoe, and tuned up an old Ford. Every time he passed the parts cabinet, he remembered the cable terminal he had used on I-35. He knew kindness wasn't always free. Sometimes the person receiving it didn't pay, but the person giving it still paid some other way. He just didn't know how high the price would be this time. Near the end of the day, his phone buzzed while he was tightening the last bolt under a hood. A text from Parkland Memorial Hospital appeared in short words that made the whole shop go dark around him. Lily Cole has been admitted to the emergency department due to a severe asthma attack. Temporary guardian requests immediate presence. Ryan read the message once, then again. Sound disappeared. He didn't remember whether he set the wrench down or dropped it. He only ran past Marcus, past the car with its hood still open, past the tool cabinet he hadn't locked. In his head, there was only Lily's breathing from that old memory broken into pieces. Outside in the lot, he opened the sedan door, his hand shaking so hard he missed the lock with the key. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Derek calling. Ryan looked at his boss's name on the screen. Knowing he was leaving work unfinished, knowing the unlocked tool cabinet could become another reason, knowing that sooner or later the cable terminal from last night would be charged to someone. He didn't answer. The sedan tore out of the Lone Star Auto lot, leaving behind the smell of motor oil, a tool cabinet door hanging slightly open, and Derek's phone call still ringing in the dark space between lives forced to choose too many times. Saturday night at Parkland Memorial had a kind of white light that made everything look more real than a person could stand. Ryan Cole sat in the plastic chair beside Lily's bed, both elbows on his knees, his hands still smelling of motor oil even though he had washed them 3 times in the hospital bathroom. His daughter slept on her side under a thin blanket, her small chest rising and falling after the inhaler doses and breathing treatments. Around her wrist was a plastic band with the name Lily Cole, age 7. Looking at those words, Ryan felt like someone had written his whole life onto a cheap strip of plastic. The doctor said the asthma attack was under control, but they needed to keep watching her. That sentence should made him feel better. But to Ryan, every hospital word had a bill sitting behind it. Under control meant not in immediate danger. Keep watching her meant more hours, more room charges, another copay. He nodded to the nurse, thanked her in a rough voice, then stayed seated after everyone left. He opened his wallet. The $47 sat in the main pocket, flat and worn. He pulled out $34 to pay the insurance copay required at the desk. The cashier wasn't cold, just tired. She handed him the receipt and looked at him for 1 extra second as if she wanted to apologize. But her job didn't let an apology change the number. Ryan put the wallet away. $13 left. $13 for gas, food for 2 days, and still no proper inhaler for Lily. That inhaler cost $89. Not the most expensive thing in the world, but for Ryan, it was a wall. He had stood in front of bigger walls, but a wall with your child's medicine written on it rises differently. It doesn't just ask whether you have money. It asks what kind of father you are when you don't. Lily shifted in her sleep and gave a very small cough. Ryan set the wallet on his thigh and leaned forward to fix her blanket. She didn't wake. Her hair stuck to her temple with sweat. A few hours earlier when he rushed into the ER, Lily had still tried to tell him not to worry. A 7-year-old had learned how to save even her breath to comfort her father. That broke Ryan more than any accusation could have. He didn't cry. Not because he was tough. Because if he started, he wasn't sure he could stop before the nurse came back. 4 years earlier, Ryan had walked into Lone Star Auto with an old tool bag, 2 work shirts, a 3-year-old daughter who had just stopped asking when her mother was coming home. His wife had left after a year of cramped rental rooms, overdue bills, dinners stretched out with instant noodles, and promises that tomorrow would be better. She hadn't abandoned Lily. She just couldn't survive the feeling that every bit of hope kept getting pushed to next week. Ryan didn't hate her. Some people leave because the love runs out. Some people leave because if they stay, they'll break. He understood the second kind. Back then, Lily was still so small she had to stand on a chair to wash her hands. Ryan didn't have a polished degree, didn't have industry connections, didn't have a savings account. The only thing he had was skill. He could hear an engine start and know part of what was wrong. He could touch a shaking steering wheel and guess whether the problem was in the wheels or the axle. Old cars were always more honest than people. They made noise when they hurt and went quiet when they were fixed right. Derek Walsh hired him at Lone Star Auto after watching him work on a dead Silverado for 10 minutes. Derek stood in the office doorway, chewing a toothpick, and said the starting pay would be low, but if Ryan proved he was worth the money, they would raise it in a few months. Ryan had heard too many promises like that, but that day he needed work more than he needed doubt. More important, Lone Star Auto offered employee insurance, not perfect, but enough to keep Lily's prescriptions from turning into a disaster every time her breathing got bad. A few months became a year, 1 year became 2, then 4. The raise never came. Derek always had a reason. Slow market, rent is going up, customers paying late. The shop had to replace a lift this month. They'd review it next month. While Ryan waited for that next month, small deductions started appearing on his paychecks. Tool wear, cleaning costs, unmatched leftover oil, gloves used over the limit, parts removed without the full code written down. Each amount was too small to start a war over. Together, they ate into food money, gas money, and medicine money. Derek was never wrong in a way that was easy to catch. He knew how to turn unfairness into a spreadsheet. Every charge had a signature somewhere, a box on a form, a line in an addendum, or a note saying the employee had been informed. If Ryan pushed back, Derek would simply pull open a drawer, take out the paperwork, and lay it on the desk with the face of a man doing nothing but following policy. The most dangerous clause wasn't in the original contract. 3 years earlier, on an afternoon so busy Ryan hadn't eaten lunch, Derek handed the shop crew an updated materials policy addendum. He said everyone had to sign it, just paperwork to protect the company if someone took parts and sold them on the side. Ryan skimmed it and saw long sections about use outside assigned work, materials responsibility, and the right to deduct. Lily was at the clinic with a lingering cough, and his phone kept buzzing in his pocket. He signed it. That signature became an invisible cord wrapped around his wrist. From then on, whenever a part went missing, Derek could decide who paid for it. Usually Ryan, because Ryan worked the most cars, stayed the latest, and argued the least. If a customer was happy, Derek took the praise. If inventory didn't match, Ryan took the deduction. Derek called it personal responsibility. In his head, Ryan called it the price of not losing Lily's insurance. He had thought about leaving many times. Some nights, he drove past other garages, saw help wanted signs, and saved the phone numbers. But a new place usually meant 3 months of probation with no insurance. Some places paid better but were 40 minutes farther away, which meant he couldn't get back in time if the school called about Lily's asthma. Some required fixed weekend shifts, and weekends were when he took her to appointments, did laundry, prepped meals, and fixed whatever had broken in the apartment. Poverty doesn't mean you have no choices. It means every choice has thorns hidden inside it. Marcus saw all of it. Marcus had worked at Lone Star Auto a year longer than Ryan, a black man 58 years old, gray at the temples, with large hands made slow by worn-out joints. He had a daughter getting ready for community college, and every dollar of tuition and stable housing mattered. Marcus didn't like Derek. The whole shop knew that, but not liking someone wasn't the same as having enough money to lose your job. He had seen Derek deduct $36 from Ryan for a bottle of brake cleaner that had been used faster than expected. He had seen Ryan lose half a day's pay for being 17 minutes late after taking Lily to the doctor. He had once seen Derek blame Ryan for an oil filter written under the wrong code, even though Marcus knew Derek was the one who had pulled the wrong one from inventory. Each time, Marcus stood nearby with his lips pressed tight, eyes lowered toward whatever was in his hands. He didn't speak. Marcus's silence wasn't empty. It was full of fear, shame, and his own bills. He made up for it in other ways. When Derek left the shop, Marcus helped Ryan finish the last car without logging the hours. He quietly left a box of leftovers beside Ryan's bag on days he knew Ryan hadn't eaten. Once he swapped shifts so Ryan could make Lily's parent-teacher meeting without Derek finding out. Those things weren't enough to fix the wrong. But they were how a tired man tried to hold on to a little kindness when he didn't yet have enough courage to tell the truth. Ryan didn't blame Marcus. He understood that trapped people often recognized each other by silence. While Ryan sat beside Ed at Parkland, in another house miles away, Evelyn Hart placed the Ubloun's receipt on her walnut desk. On Friday night, after her Range Rover started and she made it home, the first thing she did wasn't change out of her dress or pour a drink. She turned on the desk lamp, set the small piece of paper in front of her, and looked at it for so long that someone else might have thought it held a business secret. Date, time, location, work description, and handwritten signature. And the total, $0. Evelyn had spent 10 years in hospitality, learning that anything free always had its cost somewhere else. An investor once gave her a watch when she was 28, then a week later handed over buyout terms below market value. A partner once praised her as a self-made genius, then wanted his name at the top of the project. A man once told her he didn't care about her money, right before asking if she could guarantee a loan. After that, Evelyn treated kindness like a contract she hadn't finished reading. Ryan Cole unsettled her because he hadn't offered a contract. She called her personal assistant, her voice still calm but slower than usual, and asked her to find the address for Lone Star Auto in Oak Cliff. The assistant asked what she wanted to do. Evelyn looked at the receipt, looked at Ryan's slightly slanted signature, and said she didn't know yet. That was the most honest answer she had given in weeks. After the call, Evelyn opened her computer and searched through Hart Hospitality Group's secondary investment files. Her company directly owned hotels, restaurants, and several hospitality properties. It also held smaller investments through funds. She followed the name Lone Star, then Lone Star Properties, then an ownership structure she had approved 5 years earlier when expanding the Dallas real estate portfolio. Hart Hospitality, through that fund, held 37% of Lone Star Auto and the related property. 37%, large enough to demand records, small enough to be forgotten if the asset didn't cause problems. Evelyn closed the laptop. On the dark screen, she saw her own reflection. Blonde hair still styled from the event, flawless makeup, tired eyes. She had once believed she remembered every important decision, yet an unknown mechanic on I-35 had just led her back to an investment line she had signed and then forgotten. She picked up the receipt, folded it along the exact crease Ryan had left, and placed it in the top drawer. She didn't know why, but she didn't want it mixed in with the other papers. The night at the hospital moved slowly. Ryan slept in the chair for less than 20 minutes at a time, waking whenever Lily shifted. A nurse came in to check her lungs, record the numbers, and smile at him the way people smile when they know parents in that room are too exhausted to hear more medical language. Near morning, Lily woke up, her voice small and rough, and asked if he had to go to work. Ryan said he would stay there for a little while. She didn't ask where the money came from, didn't ask if he had bought the new inhaler yet. The worst part was that Lily had learned not to ask questions that might hurt her father. On Sunday morning, the sky outside the hospital window was pale blue. Ryan was watching Lily fall back asleep when his phone buzzed. Derek's name appeared, cold as another bill. He let it ring until it was almost over, then answered. Derek didn't bother chewing hello. He said Ryan had used the shop's cable terminal on a stranger's car, walked out of work without notice, and left his tool cabinet unlocked. The part would be deducted. Another workday would be deducted for leaving mid-shift. He demanded Ryan come in immediately. Ryan didn't answer right away. He looked at Lily sleeping, her small hand resting on her chest, as if she were keeping watch over her own breathing. He had $13 in his pocket, a hospital receipt, and the entire future of the coming week hanging from a paycheck that had already been cut thin. Derek added that if Ryan didn't show up, he would handle it according to the contract. That sentence closed every exit. Ryan ended the call, not because he was brave, but because if he said one more word, he would beg, and he didn't want Lily waking up to hear that voice coming from her father. He stood still for a few seconds, then texted the neighbor and asked her to come sit with Lily at the hospital. She replied immediately that she would be there in 20 minutes. Ryan leaned down and fixed Lily's blanket. She was still asleep. He looked at his daughter's face longer than usual, as if apologizing in advance for something that hadn't happened yet. Then he picked up his jacket, slipped his wallet into his pocket, and looked at the clock on the hospital wall. On his way out of the room, he turned back to look at Lily one more time. She slept so quietly, too quiet for a child, who had just been pulled out of an attack that stole her breath. Ryan wished she would cry, wished she would get angry, and wished she would demand something normal like pancakes or a comic book. Because when children still ask for things, adults are allowed to believe life hasn't forced them to understand too early. But Lily only breathed evenly, and Ryan knew he had to return to the shop before Derek turned silence into another debt. Then he stood up. On Sunday morning, Dallas had the pale gray color of a day that hadn't warmed up yet. Ryan Cole left Parkland Memorial after Mrs. Hattie, the elderly neighbor from the apartment next door, arrived to sit beside Lily's bed. She brought a bag of cookies, and the eyes of someone who understood too much about poverty to ask unnecessary questions. Ryan only had time to thank her, then lean down and kiss his daughter lightly on the forehead. Lily was still asleep, her lips a little dry, her small hand resting near the IV line. He wanted to stay until she woke up, wanted to tell her he would only be gone for a little while, but in Ryan's life, the word okay often had to be paid for with trips he didn't want to take. He drove to Lone Star Auto close to 8 in the morning. The streets were empty, the stores were still closed. The gas station had only one old pickup parked outside, and the sky hung low with no wind. Ryan didn't turn on the radio. He needed to hear the sound of his own engine, the tires rolling over the road, or anything real enough to keep him from thinking about Lily's breathing the night before. When his old sedan turned into the Lone Star Auto lot, Ryan knew right away something had been prepared. The shop door was half open, even though regular hours hadn't started yet. The office lights were on. Derek Walsh's car was parked close to the glass door, clean and polished, as if its owner had been there a long time, waiting for a small trial. Beside Derek's car was a gray sedan Ryan didn't recognize. The man standing inside the office wore a pale blue shirt, held a folder in his hand, and had the expressionless face of someone invited to witness something. Ryan turned off the engine. He sat still for a few seconds, both hands still on the steering wheel. In his pocket, he had $13 and a phone almost out of battery. His tool cabinet from last night hadn't been locked. The battery cable terminal he had used on the Range Rover still hadn't been entered in the log. He knew he was walking into a room where Derek had already chosen the outcome. The shop was still cold. The overnight smell of oil felt heavier than usual. Marcus stood in the far corner of the tool bench, holding a wrench but not working. The other 5 mechanics were there unusually early. One looked at Ryan, then lowered his eyes to his phone. Another pretended to check a tire. No one asked how Lily was, not because they didn't care, because that question might remind Derek that Ryan had left the shop because his daughter was in the hospital, and Derek hated any reason that sounded right. Derek stood in front of the office desk, the door wide open so the whole shop could hear. He wore a white polo with the Lone Star Auto logo, new jeans, and a shiny leather belt. On the desk lay a printed sheet, a contract marked with a highlighter, and a calculator. The orderliness of the office felt insulting, as if the unfairness had been wiped clean of fingerprints. Ryan walked in but didn't sit. Derek didn't ask about the hospital, didn't ask why he had left. He only pushed the calculation sheet forward. On it, every item was clearly listed. Battery cable terminal used outside a work order, weekends materials shortage fee, 1 canceled workday for leaving the shop without notice, a penalty for the customer's vehicle left unfinished, and the cost of reopening inventory after Ryan's cabinet wasn't locked. The small numbers stood beside one another and became something 23 larger than his remaining monthly pay. Derek said he wasn't going to sue. He simply wouldn't pay Ryan this month. After balancing everything, Ryan still owed the shop $23, but Derek would forgive that because he still considered Ryan someone who had worked there for 4 years, had worked. Those 2 words sat inside the sentence like a door latch. Ryan looked at the paper. He didn't shout, didn't slam the desk. Didn't say his daughter was in the hospital, or that the cable terminal was only a $15 part, or that he had helped a woman on the highway in the middle of the night. Those sentences might be true, but true didn't always mean useful. In Derek's office, anything useful had to be on paper, and Derek had already prepared the paper. Ryan only asked which clause allowed this. Derek looked almost pleased that Ryan had asked the right question. He opened the contract, turned to the addendum clipped with a yellow tab, and pointed to the highlighted section. Materials policy and use of parts outside assigned work. Employee financial responsibility for any loss, misuse, or leaving a position in a way that affects shop property, schedule, or customers. The language was long, dry, and tight as a steel fence. At the bottom of the page was Ryan's signature from 3 years earlier. Ryan looked at that signature longer than he looked at the lines above it. He remembered the afternoon he signed. Lily coughing constantly at the clinic, his phone buzzing in his pocket, Derek saying it was only an addendum to stop parts theft. He remembered not having eaten since morning, remembered the Camry waiting in the shop, remembered feeling like if he took 10 more minutes, he'd lose the whole day's pay. He had signed it with his own hand. Now that signature stood in front of him like a stranger that had betrayed him. No clear legal ground, no lawyer, no money to call a lawyer, no time to become the kind of person who fully understood every document he had once been pressured to sign. Ryan felt every exit shrink into a thin line under Derek's feet. Derek kept talking, his voice even, like he was training a new employee on personal responsibility. He reminded Ryan that Lone Star Auto wasn't a charity. Parts didn't appear out of nowhere. Customers didn't pay for mechanics who ran out in the middle of a shift. If everyone started using shop supplies to fix strangers' cars for free, the business would collapse. He didn't yell, but each word was placed high enough for the whole shop to hear. Humiliation, when spoken in a reasonable voice, often hurts more than shouting. When Ryan heard that his whole month's pay was being held, his eyes stayed on the paper. That paycheck wasn't a reward. It was Lily's inhaler, rent, electricity, gas, food for the next 2 days. When Derek said he wasn't paying it, he wasn't just taking money. He was taking away Ryan's ability to pretend Monday could still save them. Marcus was still standing in the corner of the shop. The wrench lay in his hand, the metal head pointing toward the floor. Ryan didn't look at him, but he knew Marcus was there. Marcus had seen the spare for Crapple terminal in Ryan's toolbox, had heard Ryan's talk about the Range Rover, had known Derek had used that addendum to deduct too much money too many times. Maybe he wanted to speak. Maybe he was remembering his own daughter about to start community college, the car loan, the rent, and how Derek could turn anyone into the next one.
Ryan didn't blame Marcus.
But not blaming him didn't make the loneliness any less cold. The other 5 mechanics stayed quiet too. No one said Ryan worked harder than anyone else in the shop. No one said he often stayed late without adding the hours. No one mentioned the times Derek had taken credit for Ryan's work to keep big customers happy, because Derek signed their paychecks, and when a man with the power to cut food money from your family is standing in the room, even the truth starts doing math. Some people go to work every day knowing more is being taken from them than they're getting back, but they don't have another door they can walk through. Ryan Cole had done that for 4 years. Stay with this story, because the most important part is about to happen. Derek pulled out another sheet of paper. It was a termination notice, with a blank space for Ryan to sign that he had received it. He didn't call it being fired on the spot. He called it ending the employment relationship due to violation of the materials policy and leaving the work area without permission. That sounded much cleaner than the truth. A father had run from the shop to the hospital because his daughter couldn't breathe, and now his month's pay was being taken because he had stopped to help a stranger. Ryan didn't sign. He only placed the paper back on the desk. Derek tilted his head as if his patience were being tested. The man in the blue shirt wrote something in the file. Maybe that Ryan had refused to sign. Maybe he was accounting. Maybe he was simply another person invited in to make Ryan's life look more procedural. Derek stepped out of the office and walked straight to Ryan's tool bench. He opened the drawer and started digging through every tray like he was taking inventory after a theft. A few screws fell onto the floor. The sound carried through the quiet shop. Ryan bent down by instinct and picked them up one by one. He didn't want to give Derek another reason to say he had damaged something. He wasn't going to let a 10-cent screw become another deduction in his life. Derek watched him crouched out on the floor and a thin smile appeared. He asked whether Ryan thought this place was a charity. This was a business. Anyone who didn't understand business had no place in the shop. Ryan kept picking up screws. One rolled close to the toe of Derek's shoe. Ryan reached for it, picked it up, and wiped it with his oil-stained thumb. That was the moment Marcus moved, barely. His shoulders tightened, and his grip on the wrench hardened. But he still didn't speak. Ryan saw the movement at the edge of his eye. The most painful part wasn't that Marcus stayed completely silent. The most painful part was knowing he had almost spoken, then pulled himself back. Derek shifted from mockery into a louder voice. I still didn't need to yell, because the whole shop was already listening. He announced that Ryan was fired immediately, his whole month's pay would be withheld, the deductions had balanced the account, and his personal belongings had to be removed within 10 minutes. If Ryan caused trouble, the police would be called. The threat was spoken like procedure, but Ryan understood it didn't land on everyone the same way. A black man in oil-stained clothes, standing inside a white owner's shop on a Sunday morning, is accused of taking parts. The police wouldn't need to hear the whole story to make everything worse, so Ryan stood up slowly. He wiped his hands on his pants. Oil and gray dust left long streaks. He looked around the shop once, not to ask for help, but as if memorizing the place where he had left 4 years of back pain, cracked fingernails, unfinished lunches, and swallowed anger. Everyone avoided his eyes. Marcus looked down at the floor. The wrench was still in his hand like an apology that never became words. Ryan opened his locker. Inside were an old jacket, an empty lunch container, a photo of Lily clipped to the inside of the door, and a few tools he had bought himself years ago. He took the photo first. In it, Lily was smiling with 2 front teeth missing, standing beside her father's toolbox, proud as if she had just fixed the whole world. Ryan placed the photo in his inner jacket pocket. He took the rest slowly because his hands needed something to do so they wouldn't shake. Derek didn't stop. He kept talking about responsibility, about lessons, about how Ryan should be grateful he wasn't being pursued legally. Each sentence fell like metal dust. Ryan heard it, but he didn't take it in. In his head, there was only the hospital, $13, the inhaler still unbought, and Lily waking up, maybe asking where her father had gone. Then the first sound that didn't belong to that room came from outside the shop door. A smooth, heavy, expensive engine rolled slowly into the lot. Not a regular customer's pickup, not a tow truck, not an old sedan needing an oil change. The whole shop turned almost at once. The light at the doorway was cut by the glossy black body of a car easing in, its paint reflecting the Lone Star Auto sign in a warped shape along the side door. The car didn't park outside. It rolled straight into the shop through the open bay, slow enough that no one thought it had taken a wrong turn. Derek had his mouth open, about to say something else, then stopped. Ryan stood beside his tool cabinet, one hand holding his bag, the other still smeared with oil. Marcus looked up for the first time. The other 5 mechanics forgot to pretend they were busy. The black car stopped right in the middle of the lane, where normal customers were never allowed to stop. The engine shut off. The rear door opened. A blonde woman stepped out in a dark dress and a light coat, her face calm to the point of cold. Ryan recognized her before he understood why she was there. Friday night, I-35, the dead Range Rover, the $0 receipt. Derek looked at her, clearly not recognizing her. But the way the car had parked, the way the driver didn't step far away, and the way the woman didn't need to ask permission made the whole shop understand she wasn't a lost customer. She looked straight at Ryan, not at the oil on his shirt, not at the bag in his hand, not at Derek first. Only at Ryan, as if the first thing in that room that needed fixing wasn't a car. And for the first time all morning, Derek couldn't keep talking. Evelyn Hart stepped out of the black car, while the smell of motor oil still hung around Ryan like a second shirt. Her heels touched the concrete floor, marked with old grease stains, a small click that was still enough to make the mechanics near the door automatically move aside. Derek Walsh was still caught in the middle of his unfinished sentence, mouth slightly open, one hand still pointing toward Ryan's tool cabinet. Orion stood beside the open cabinet, one hand holding his bag of personal belongings, the other still smeared with oil. He recognized Evelyn, but his first reaction wasn't relief. It was the confusion of a poor man who wasn't used to seeing something he had done at night return in broad daylight. A woman in expensive clothes walking into the place where he had just been fired. Evelyn looked at him to make sure he was still on his feet. Then she turned toward Derek's desk. From her small clutch, she took out a folded piece of paper. She placed it on the desk, where Derek had just laid out Ryan's payroll deduction sheet. It was the receipt Ryan had written on the hood of her Range Rover Friday night. The edge of the paper was slightly bent. Time, 10 a.m. Location on I-30 electrical system check. Complete, battery post cleaned, complete, Battery cable terminal replaced, complete. Engine restarted successfully. At the bottom was Ryan Cole's signature. The total line read. Derek looked at the paper, then at Evelyn. He didn't understand what it meant yet. A $0 receipt written by a mechanic on the side of the road looked like evidence that Ryan had used a part for an unauthorized purpose. He touched the description line with one finger. Evelyn didn't argue. She let him read. Inside the shop, the mechanics stood scattered between unfinished cars. One man was holding an oil filter and had forgotten to screw the cap on. Marcus stayed in his corner, looking at the receipt like a small object that might open the door the whole shop had grown used to living behind. Derek asked who she was and why she had walked into his shop like that. She only said she needed to review how Lone Star Auto recorded a $15 part that had saved a woman stranded on the side of the highway near 11 p.m. That made several mechanics look toward Ryan. Ryan stayed quiet. She looked at her screen, then turned on speakerphone. A professional female voice came through the device. Hart Hospitality's legal assistant confirmed that Evelyn was standing at the operating address of Lone Star Auto, an entity in which Hart Hospitality Group indirectly owned 37% through the Lone Star Properties Investment Fund. Under the shareholder agreement and record inspection rights, she had the authority to request financial books, materials reports, payroll records, and employment contracts connected to the shop's operations. No one needed the voice to repeat it. Derek stood still, but the color in his face changed slowly, from angry red to pale calculation. 37% wasn't absolute majority ownership, but it was large enough to turn the woman in front of him from a stranger into someone with the right to walk straight into his books. A layer of power he hadn't accounted for had just stepped onto the shop's concrete floor. Ryan heard that number too. He didn't understand ownership structures, investment funds, or shareholder rights. He only understood that the woman whose car he had fixed hadn't received a free repair simply because she was richer than him. She was part of the place taking his paycheck, even if she seemed to have only just remembered that herself. It didn't feel like magic. It felt like an old drawer being opened by mistake. She placed the phone on the desk beside the Doltonier receipt and Derek's deduction sheet. 3 pieces of paper lay close together like 3 different ways of seeing the same man. A mechanic who helped when no one was paying, an owner who turned that help into a debt, and a system now being forced to look at both. She asked to see employee Cole's contract. Derek gave a short laugh but didn't become a real one. He asked who she thought she was, demanding access to a private personnel file. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She said that if the contract wasn't on the desk in 30 seconds, a full audit of Lone Star Auto's operations would begin Monday morning, and a data preservation notice would be sent within 10 minutes. Derek looked at the man in the blue shirt inside the office. The man avoided his eyes by looking down at the folder. Derek understood immediately. No one in this room wanted to become the reason the audit arrived faster. He stepped into the office, yanked a drawer open harder than necessary, then came back with a stack of papers. He placed Ryan's contract on the desk like a shield. Evelyn turned the pages with her fingertips and stopped at the addendum from 3 years earlier. The materials clause had been marked with a yellow highlighter. Ryan looked at his own signature at the bottom of the page again, and the old feeling returned. One rushed signature on an afternoon, when his daughter was coughing at the clinic, now being used as proof that he deserved to have his whole month's pay taken. Derek clung to that clause like a man holding on to the last railing. He said he was following the law. The employment contract allowed deductions for parts. Ryan had signed it. Shop materials didn't belong to individual employees. A workday abandoned, a tool cabinet left unlocked, a customer vehicle left unfinished. All of it was damage. None of those sentences were new. They had been used many times over the past 4 years. The only difference was that today, someone outside the shop had enough power to listen all the way through. Evelyn kept reading. She asked when the addendum had been signed, whether wages had been renegotiated at the same time, whether there had been separate notice about deduction rights, and whether the deductions were matched against actual losses or applied at management's discretion. Derek's answer became longer. The longer it became, the more empty spaces opened inside it. He said the policy applied to everyone. He said everybody knew. He said if Ryan hadn't read it carefully, that wasn't the company's responsibility. Evelyn placed Wenger on the addendum. She said an addendum that added deduction rights after the original contract took effect, without renegotiated wages or full confirmation of informed consent, could violate Texas employment contract standards and absolutely violated the operational standards of an entity in which Hart Hospitality held an ownership interest. She didn't make herself a judge. She only said enough for Derek to understand. The paperwork he had once used as a weapon could now turn its edge back toward him. Derek turned to Ryan, calling him the one who took the part, abandoned the job, and was now letting a wealthy customer interfere in internal business. Ryan didn't answer. He didn't know where he was supposed to stand in the shop anymore. According to Derek, he was no longer an employee, but he wasn't exactly an outsider either. His bag of personal belongings was still in his hand. Lily's photo was in his inner jacket pocket. The phone in his pants could buzz from the hospital at any second. That was when Marcus placed the wrench on the tool bench. The sound wasn't loud, but it made the people near him turn their heads. Marcus stepped out from the corner of the shop slowly, like a man crossing over 3 years of silence. He didn't look at Ryan first. He looked at Evelyn, then at the contract on the desk. His voice was low, but every sentence was clear. He said Ryan's first deduction happened in August. 3 years earlier, after an oil filter had been written under the wrong code on the inventory sheet. Marcus knew Ryan hadn't pulled the wrong part because he had personally seen Derek move that filter to another vehicle, so a regular customer wouldn't have to wait. He said in November, that same year, Ryan was deducted $36 for a bottle of brake cleaner, even though that bottle had been used on 3 cars under Derek's direct order. Talked about March of the following year, when Ryan lost half a day's pay for taking Lily to the doctor, even though Ryan had worked until 9 that night to make up the time. Then he listed smaller charges: gloves, shop towels, connectors, one end-of-day inventory opening that had been charged to Ryan, even though the key had been in Derek's drawer. Marcus didn't perform like a movie witness. He spoke like someone who was finally tired of remembering alone. Specific dates, specific amounts, vehicle names, license plates, customers, closing times. Each detail landed on the concrete floor like the screws Ryan had been forced to pick up small by itself, but together it formed the shape of 3 years of being quietly stripped down. Ryan turned toward Marcus. There was no victory in his eyes. There was a late question. Why now? Marcus didn't look at him for long. He looked down at his own hands and said he had written it down because he was afraid that one day he would forget what he had seen. He didn't say he was sorry. Not yet. Apology would have been too small beside what he was doing. He chose to put the truth out first. Derek cut in, his voice hardening. He said Marcus was lying to protect a coworker, said none of it had proof. Said Lone Star Auto had operated for years without a complaint. Evelyn didn't argue through emotion. She asked Marcus to send every note, every photo of Plus stubs if he had them, and any related information to Hart Hospitality's legal department. Marcus nodded. His hand trembled slightly as he took out his phone. Derek went back to the old shield. He said he was following the law. The employment contract allowed deductions for parts. Ryan had signed it. In his voice was desperation, trying to wear anger as clothing. He was no longer speaking to Ryan. He was speaking to Evelyn, to the man in the blue shirt, to the mechanics listening around them. He needed the room to believe the law was on his side, because if it wasn't, then all those years would have another name. Evelyn looked at him long enough that he had to stop in the middle of a sentence. She said if he truly believed everything was lawful, then he shouldn't be afraid of an audit. And if he had used his employees' lack of options to force them into unfavorable terms, and then applied those terms however he wanted, he wasn't protecting the business. He was only making the business look clean on paper while the workers paid the dirtiest part. Derek said she couldn't do that. Evelyn answered, "I can. And I will." She didn't say it loudly. Right after that, she gave instructions through the phone that was still connected. Send a preservation notice for financial records, payroll records, inventory logs, employment contract addendums, and repair schedules for the last 3 years. An internal audit would begin within 30 days under shareholder rights and the governance agreement. There was no scene with police storming in, no Derek in handcuffs. Real justice inside a business rarely wears a uniform. It begins with emails, locked data, and access rights. Derek understood that. His face didn't collapse in some dramatic way. He simply sat down slowly in the office chair, like a man doing math in his head and no longer sure where the numbers could be hidden. An audit didn't need to hate him, it only needed to read. Before leaving the shop, Evelyn asked for one more thing. Ryan's current month's wages had to be paid in full that day. Derek objected by reflex, but his voice had lost its floor. Evelyn didn't ask him to transfer the money from the shop account right then. She called Hart Properties and arranged a transfer to Ryan's account with the note advance operating expense, to be reconciled in the audit. It wasn't romantic. It didn't look like charity. It was simply the way someone with power inside the system used the system to stop one man from being crushed further over the weekend. Ryan received the bank alert when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He opened the screen. His full monthly pay appeared, more complete than any paycheck he had seen recently. His hand held the phone longer than necessary. His eyes didn't leave the number because inside his head it immediately turned into an inhaler, gas, food, and a hospital bill. He wanted to say something to Evelyn, but the thank you got stuck too close to exhaustion. Evelyn picked up the receipt from the desk. She didn't take Derek's deduction sheet or Ryan's contract. Legal would deal with those. She kept this receipt herself. Before turning toward the door, she looked at Ryan. He still hadn't moved from beside the tool cabinet. The bag of personal belongings in his hand made him look like a man life had just thrown out of the only room where he knew how to earn a living. Ryan followed her outside because he didn't want to speak in front of Derek. The light in the lot made him squint after nearly an hour inside the shop. The black car sat still, the engine not yet running. Evelyn stopped beside the rear door and looked down at the receipt in her hand. The 00 down sat between them like a question neither of them had fully answered. She asked why he hadn't taken the money that night. Ryan thought for a while. Not because the answer was complicated. Because he wasn't used to someone asking about his motives without preparing to turn them into a weakness. He looked toward the road, where traffic passed Lone Star Auto like any other Sunday morning. Then he said, "Because you were standing alone on I-35 and at 11 at night. That's not a time to negotiate price." Evelyn looked at him. There was only a long pause, long enough for the sentence to touch something she had spent 10 years in business protecting herself from. She folded the receipt and put it back into her wallet. Ryan turned his head toward the shop as the phone in his pocket buzzed again. The hospital number appeared on the screen. Before he answered, Evelyn had stepped into the car. The door closed, cleanly soundproofing two worlds from each other. But for the first time since Friday night, Ryan was no longer standing completely alone between them. On Monday morning, Ryan Cole stood at the pharmacy counter at 7:42, his jacket still carrying the smell of the hospital and his hair not yet combed. Outside the glass door, Dallas was waking up, a bus breathing hot exhaust at the corner. Ryan placed Lily's prescription on the counter with both hands, as if one careless movement could make the paper blow away. The pharmacist he knew looked at the name on the prescription, then looked at Ryan. She didn't ask if he had enough this time. The wages transferred on Sunday were still in his account, enough that Ryan didn't have to count cash under fluorescent lights. When the card reader said approved, he looked at the screen for one extra beat because his body wasn't used to a necessary thing being solved on the first try. The new inhaler was inside a white paper bag. Ryan placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his chest, and then went to the convenience store next door to buy a box of cereal and 2 bananas. He arrived back at the hospital before 8. Lily was awake, sitting up in bed, her hair tangled from a night of interrupted sleep. She first looked at her father's medicine bag, then at his face. She asked where the money came from in a voice that wasn't a child's curiosity, but the voice of a kid who had learned that every item in the house came with a reason adults worried. Ryan sat down on the edge of the bed, took out the inhaler, and checked the label the way the doctor had told him to. He said this month's paycheck came early. Lily nodded. She didn't ask anything else. That nod made Ryan turn his face toward the window for a few seconds. Lily was 7. She should have been asking why the weather was still cold, why hospitals had vending machines, and why the bananas at the little store were smaller than the ones at the supermarket, but she accepted just enough of an answer and left the rest for the adults. Ryan peeled the banana for her. Lily ate slowly, and between bites, she kept looking at the medicine bag as if checking that it was real. When the nurse came in to measure her breathing, she obediently raised her arm. Ryan stood beside her, one hand on the back of the chair. He didn't tell Lily he had just lost his job. The first morning after a serious asthma attack shouldn't make a child carry her father's fear too. By noon, the hospital discharged Lily with a follow-up appointment and the familiar instructions. Ryan brought her back to their small apartment, placed the medicine in the plastic bin on the kitchen shelf where Lily could see it but wouldn't have to worry about it herself. The apartment smelled like laundry detergent and toast. Mrs. Hattie had left a pot of soup on the stove with a note that said, "Eat it, don't argue." Ryan read the line twice before folding it. On Monday afternoon, while Lily slept on the sofa with the blanket pulled up to her chin, Ryan opened his email on his phone. A message from Evelyn Hart had arrived that morning. She didn't offer him a ready-made position, didn't say she was going to fix his life, didn't turn his kindness into a debt he had to accept. She only wrote that she had referred Ryan Cole to 3 Hart hospitality partner garages in Dallas, based on one time she had personally witnessed his skill and work ethic. If he wanted, he could contact them for interviews himself. Ryan read the email for a long time. The way it was written made it easier to breathe. Rich people often helped in a way that made the person receiving the help feel smaller. Evelyn didn't do that. She set 3 doors in front of him. He called each place the next morning. For the first time, his voice when he spoke about 4 years of experience at Lone Star Auto wasn't the voice of someone begging to be rescued. He talked about vehicles, maintenance schedules, electrical diagnostics, difficult customers, and how to keep parts records straight. The second garage scheduled him for Wednesday afternoon. The third scheduled him for Thursday morning. We went to the interviews in his cleanest work shirt, carrying photos of a few old jobs and a short list of certifications. When the manager asked why he had left Lone Star, Ryan didn't tell the whole story. He only said the environment no longer fit and he needed a clearer workplace. The following week, Ryan had a new job at a garage servicing commercial fleets north of Dallas, 40% higher pay, full health insurance after 30 days, a steadier schedule. On his first day, he sat in the car in the lot for almost 10 minutes before going inside, looking at the new contract on his lap. He read every line so slowly that the manager called to ask if he was lost. This time he didn't sign anything before he understood it. Marcus texted him 2 weeks later. The message came while Ryan was changing plugs on a delivery van. Just one line, "I should spoken sooner." Ryan read it, then turned the phone face down on the tool bench. He finished the van, washed his hands, and only then replied, "You spoke at the right time." He didn't add an exclamation point. He didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't really okay. But the right time was also a form of saving someone, especially when the person speaking had to step through his own fear to do it. Marcus quit Lone Star Auto at the end of that month. He didn't make a scene. He only packed his tools, took his jacket, and sent Ryan a photo of the wrench lying alone on the bench. Ryan understood. Some apologies don't need to be longer than a picture. As for Derek, he didn't fall apart in one big scene. No police arrived in the middle of a workday. No reporters stood outside the garage. No moment came where he was dragged into the light. The audit lasted 6 weeks. Hart Properties people came in and reviewed inventory logs, payroll records, contracts, addenda, repair schedules, internal messages, and the small deductions that had been hidden under the name of materials. Derek still opened the shop every morning, but he no longer walked past the mechanics with the same certainty. Every time the office phone rang, he looked at the screen before picking up. The outcome didn't make anyone clap. Hart Properties sold its 37% stake to another operating partner on the condition that management be replaced and an independent payroll system be installed. Derek still kept a piece of the garage and still appeared around it, but he was no longer the only person who got to define right and wrong. Justice came through forms, meetings, transfer terms, and tired signatures, slower than an audience usually wants. But it left something more durable than a punishment scene. Derek lost the power to turn his brutal employees to his private policy. Evelyn didn't turn the story into a PR campaign either. 3 months later, Hart Hospitality partnered with a local nonprofit to create a legal support fund for technical service workers in Dallas. The fund didn't carry her name. It didn't carry Ryan's name. It was called the Oak Cliff Trade Workers Fund, named for the neighborhood where Lone Star Auto stood, and where many mechanics still walked into shifts without knowing how much the contracts they signed could take from them. The launch took place in a community room, not a grand hotel. Evelyn stood in the back row and listened as the nonprofit attorney explained contract counseling, wage rights, complaint support, and free classes on reading employment addendums. In her wallet, she carried the $0 receipt now pressed flat. No one mentioned it on stage. She didn't need them to. 3 months after that weekend, Ryan woke up at 5:50 in an apartment that felt quieter than before. He put on his new uniform, dark blue, the new garage logo on the chest. The toolbox beside the door was different now. Newer, stronger drawers, a handle without cracks. Lily sat on the floor, her hair tied a little crooked, carefully opening each compartment the way she did every morning. She checked the number 12 wrench, the Phillips screwdriver, electrical tape, and the small flashlight. This time she had added paper labels in different colors, her handwriting slightly tilted. Tester, connectors, small screws, buy more Tuesday. Ryan stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a travel mug, watching his daughter do her work with the seriousness adults often lose as they grow up. Lily asked if he liked the new place. Ryan snapped the lid onto the mug. Yeah. She didn't look up right away. She arranged the socket set, then asked who the woman at the shop had been that day. The question came out lightly, but Ryan knew it had been sitting in her head for a long time. Children have a way of holding questions until the adults look steady enough to answer them. He sat down beside Lily. Someone I met on the road. Lily nodded, as if that answer made sense to her world. Then she went back to checking each compartment. She didn't ask more. Maybe she understood that some people pass through your life only once and still change the direction of the road. Maybe she was only thinking the number 12 wrench was a little crooked. Either way, Ryan didn't force her to understand more than her age should have to hold. Before he left for work, Lily closed the toolbox and pushed it toward him. Ready. Ryan picked it up. For the first time in months, the weight didn't feel like a debt. When I think back to the moment Ryan stood up after picking up those screws from the shop floor, I don't remember him as weak. I remember him as a man who understood the price of every reaction too well. There are plenty of moments when viewers want the main character to shout, slam a desk, and say one perfect line that leaves the villain speechless. But real life, especially for people raising children one paycheck at a time, isn't that simple. One wrong sentence can cost a job. One strong movement can be written down as disorderly behavior. One heated moment can turn the person being harmed into the one being blamed. Ryan wasn't quiet because he had nothing to say. He had 4 years of things to say. He had every payroll deduction, every late night, every prescription for Lily, every signature he wished he had read more carefully. But in that room, in front of Derek, he knew his words wouldn't change the system Derek was holding in his hand. So he picked up the screws. He kept his voice steady. He stood up slowly. He did the one thing that still belonged to him. He didn't give Derek another reason to bend the story. I think there are two kinds of silence many of us have lived through. One is silence from fear. We swallow the sentence because of rent, because of children, because of health insurance, because of aging parents, and because we don't yet have a plan to leave. That kind of silence doesn't deserve contempt. Sometimes it's how a person survives tomorrow. But there is another kind, silence because you know. You know this is easy to speak yet. You know the truth needs the right listener. You know that if you can stay calm for a few more minutes, the person abusing power may leave a clearer trail. Ryan had lived inside both kinds of silence for 4 years. He was silent because he feared losing Lily's insurance. He was silent because he couldn't afford a lawyer. He was silent because a rushed addendum could be used against him. But on that Sunday morning, when Evelyn walked in and Marcus finally spoke with specific dates and numbers, Ryan's silence changed meaning. It was no longer disappearance. It became the ground that made other people's truth easier to hear. What moved me most wasn't that Evelyn had money or shareholder power. Money and power only matter when they're used in the right place. What matters is that she didn't turn Ryan into an emotional wreck. She didn't hand him a new life in some beautiful speech. She opened doors, made a fair referral, restored the wages taken from him, and then let Ryan interview for himself, sign a new contract for himself, and stand back up on his own feet. That is how real dignity is restored. Not by lifting someone like Charity, but by removing the hands pressing them down. And Lily, the little girl who checked her father's toolbox every morning, reminds me that children often see more than adults think. They know when money is tight. They know when parents are trying to say things gently. They learn not to ask more, not because they aren't curious, but because they don't want to hurt the person they love. No child should have to grow up that way. But because people like Ryan still get up every day, they still have a chance to learn another lesson. Dignity can be pushed down, but it doesn't have to be sold. Was there a moment this week when you stayed silent and you knew what kind of silence it was? If there was, I hope you're gentle enough with yourself to understand why you did it. And if one day you see someone else staying quiet under the weight of unfairness, I hope you don't rush to call them weak. Maybe they're only saving the last part of themselves for the right moment to stand up.